Hey, this is Big John Summers, and I want to thank you so much for listening to the Tennessee History Nerd. By the way, if you enjoyed this episode, I want you to know that there's a lot more content waiting for you out there. We're adding new episodes every week, and we're working our way across the whole state of Tennessee, covering stories from prehistory all the way into the 20th century. So if you like Tennessee history, there's already a catalog of stories out there for you to explore. So, scroll back through those previous episodes. You might just find something you weren't expecting. And again, thanks so much for listening. Welcome to the Tennessee History Nerd. This is a podcast dedicated to Tennessee's past. Every week we bring you a new story about the people, places, and events that have shaped Tennessee and made it and us who and what we are. So grab your favorite beverage, find a comfortable place, and sit back and enjoy. Tennessee is a big state. Not Texas, California, or Alaska big, but to drive from Johnson City to Memphis, that's about a 500-mile drive. So, when we're talking about comprehensively covering the stories of the state, it's a big task, and it helps to take it in bite-sized chunks. And one way is one county at a time. So, as promised when we began the podcast, we're going to do just that. We're going to drive across the state one county at a time, and frankly, the easiest and probably the most ecumenical way to do that is to take the counties alphabetically. And thus, in this County Spotlight number 2, we're driving across Bedford County and looking at its story this week. So make sure you got your sunglasses on, your drink in the cup holder, and your seatbelt fastened. We're on the road and we're headed into Bedford County, Tennessee. Whiskey and horses and gators, oh my. That doesn't sound like Tennessee. It sounds like Florida, but it's absolutely Bedford County, Tennessee, and we'll talk about all that and more today in our drive across Bedford County. But let's start in the beginning and not get ahead of ourselves. Bedford County was formed pretty early in the history of the state. One of the interesting things a lot of folks don't realize is that Tennessee actually started with only 9 counties. And all of these go back to the North Carolina days. And those original 9 all predate the official birth date of the state of Tennessee. We now have 95 counties, but the state is the same size as it was in 1796, aside from slight alterations such as around finally officially nailing down the contested border with Kentucky and things like that. So that means that those 95 counties come from subdividing those original 9, sometimes several times. Now here's where it gets interesting as we talk about Bedford County. First, in 1799, Williamson County was carved out of Davidson County, one of the original 9 counties. Wilson County was carved out of Sumner County, another of the original 9. And then subsequently, Rutherford County was formed from parts of Williamson and Wilson counties in 1803. And finally, then in 1807, Bedford County was created from the lower part of Rutherford County, which at that time stretched all the way to the southern border of Tennessee. And in turn, Bedford County itself would have other counties carved out of it. Lincoln County, Marshall County, Coffee County, and Moore County all derive at least part of their respective areas from Bedford County's original plat when it was formed from Rutherford County in 1807. Bedford County itself was named for Thomas Bedford. Bedford was an officer in the Revolutionary War and was one of the early settlers of Rutherford County. He had received land grants for his Revolutionary War service both in Davidson County, Tennessee, as well as in Christian and Harrison counties in Kentucky. He partnered with Robert Weakley to form the new town of Jefferson. Today, most of us are unaware of the town of Jefferson because it's one of the many ghost towns under lakes. Its site is now under Percy Priest Lake. But many of us have traveled Jefferson Pike across Rutherford County, and it actually was the first county seat of Rutherford County before Murfreesboro even existed. But Bedford died in 1804 in Old Jefferson as the town was still being built at the age of 46. So 3 years later, when the southern part of Rutherford County was being carved out to create a new county, the memory of early pioneer Thomas Bedford was memorialized by naming that new county after him. And the county itself was taking shape as pioneers began to settle the area and carve a new life out of the frontier. One of those early names, though, is actually quite familiar, not only to Tennesseans, but to all Americans. Andrew Jackson. Jackson made a good bit of his fortune by shrewd land speculation. And one such example occurred right here in Bedford County when he acquired 5,000 acres, some of which included the site of modern-day Wartrace. To put that into perspective, 5,000 acres is almost 8 square miles. And speaking of Wartrace, it was one of the early railroad towns in Bedford County, and we'll be talking about a few of those today. But before it was on the railroad, Wartrace was on a much older road. It was on one of the branches of the Warriors Path. The Chickamauga Cherokees who attacked Buchanan Station in 1792 probably traveled that very path from the Tennessee River up to the modern-day Nashville area. And the 1794 Nickajack raid against the Chickamauga settlements likely traveled at least some of the same path in the opposite direction. So in essence, the Warriors' Path was an early military highway before we actually called them such. And since such paths were often called traces, like Natchez Trace, for example, this was also known as the Wartrace. And thus, since the town was established near that path, it took the name Wartrace. And Wartrace's history itself is almost representative of the county in many ways. The railroad, which at first was the Nashville and Chattanooga line, the N&C, and then after the Civil War, it was the same rail line, but it was the Nashville, Chattanooga, and St. Louis Railroad, the old NC and St. L. The railroad was the original driver for the founding of the town in the 1850s, which was originally known as Wartrace Depot, the place where the railroad crossed the old Warrior Path. If you're a business with a strong connection to history, education, travel, or place-based storytelling, and you're looking to reach an audience that values those things, we should talk. You can reach me at john.summers@summersmediaenterprises.com. Now, let's get back to our story. It also had a role during the Civil War when it was General William Hardee's winter headquarters during the Tullahoma Campaign. But because of the railroad, one of the most notable landmarks in the county was built in Wartrace, what was originally a hotel built for the railroad in the early 1900s called the Hotel Overall. The Hotel Overall eventually became the base for a number of horse trainers, trainers of Tennessee walking horses. Those guys in time created the Tennessee Walking Horse Celebration, and the first such show was held in 1939. We'll talk more about that shortly, but Floyd and Olive Carruthers bought the hotel in the early 1930s, and Floyd himself was a walking horse owner and trainer. In fact, he owned and trained Strolling Jim, the very first winner of the Walking Horse Celebration. Because of the Carruthers' involvement in the Walking Horse Celebration, Hotel Overall was renamed the Walking Horse Hotel, a name it still bears to this day. Strolling Jim was buried on the property when he died in 1957. Since 2011, the Walking Horse Museum has also been located in Wartrace. It's directly across the railroad tracks and square from the hotel. It started in Shelbyville and then was moved in the 1990s to Lynchburg, but given the role of Wartrace as the cradle of the Tennessee walking horse, it seems very appropriate that the museum should be located in the town. Now, just a winding country drive away from Wartrace is another quaint little railroad town that sprang up as an N&C whistle stop, Bell Buckle. If you like neat little crafty boutiques, antiques, old-style ice cream parlors, and southern meat and threes, Bell Buckle is your kind of place. Local legend has it taking its name from nearby Bell Buckle Creek, which in turn, according to legend, got its name from two symbols carved into a tree in the frontier days, the images of a cowbell and a buckle. And one explanation of these symbols is that they were taken to be warnings from the Native Americans. They didn't want anything wearing a bell or a buckle, livestock or people, coming into the country. Officially established by the railroad in the 1850s, it also became the home of noted preparatory institution, the Webb School, in 1886. Webb has been called the oldest continuously operating boarding school in the South. It was started by William Sawney Webb in 1870 in Culleoka, Tennessee, but it moved to Bell Buckle in 1886 when Culleoka incorporated and legalized the sale of alcohol. Webb remained a staunch prohibitionist his entire career, including when he briefly served as a U.S. Senator from Tennessee, and was the last former Confederate soldier to do so. His only speech in the Senate during the few weeks that he served was to support a law prohibiting the interstate transport of liquor. And the Webb schools in California were later founded by his youngest son, Thompson. Webb School in Bell Buckle has produced a number of notable graduates over the years, including one of two governors born in Bedford County. Prentice Cooper, who was governor from 1939 until 1945 and then later was U.S. ambassador to Peru. Former U.S. Representative Jim Cooper is Prentice Cooper's son. Also of note, and my Mobile friends may find this especially interesting, Bell Buckle hosts the annual RC and Moon Pie Festival each year on the third Saturday in June. 2026 will mark the 32nd year for this, which began in 1994 to celebrate Chattanooga's famous treat on its 75th anniversary. For my Tennessee friends, Mobile is known for its Moon Pie over Mobile New Year's celebration. And since we mentioned that there were two governors from Tennessee born in Bedford County, Prentice Cooper was one, and the other is Jim Nance McCord. McCord was born in the little hamlet of Unionville. Interestingly, he followed immediately after Prentice Cooper. Cooper left office in 1945, and McCord took office at that same time. So not only does Bedford County boast two governors born in the county, they were two consecutive governors. And since we've also been talking about the rail towns in Bedford County, it probably makes sense to head down to the little town of Normandy as well. Like Wartrace and Bell Buckle, Normandy was established as a stop on the N&C Railroad, barely inside Bedford County. The Coffee County line is just a short distance away. The historic Beach Hall residence near Normandy was built during the Civil War for Absalom Low Landis and was one of Prentice Cooper's homes. Cooper's wife, Argy, was the granddaughter of Absalom Low Landis. Also near Normandy, but just a few hundred yards across into Coffee County, is the historic George Dickel Distillery, one of the two legacy distilleries in Tennessee. The other, of course, being Jack Daniel. I mentioned Dickel even though it's in Coffee County because of its proximity to Normandy. But nowadays, Normandy is probably best known for its nearby lakes. Since the mid-1970s, it's been home to two of them. If you enjoy the way we tell stories here on the Tennessee History Nerd, there's another show you might want to check out, Dauphin Island Diaries. Same approach, different setting. Stories from the Gulf Coast, rooted in place and built from the sources up. You can find it wherever you're listening right now. And now, back to our story. The larger and better known takes its name from the town, Normandy Lake. Normandy Lake also is in part of Coffee County, but it is in Bedford County as well. Normandy Dam was completed in 1976 by the TVA, and the lake was impounded then. Unlike a lot of TVA dams, this dam was neither built to produce hydroelectric power, nor was it created to aid navigation. Its purpose is primarily flood control and economic development. The dam is on the Duck River, which is the county line in this area, separating Bedford and Coffee counties. A fish hatchery is on the Bedford County side of the dam. But there's also another much smaller lake that was created by the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency, the TWRA, in the mid 1970s as well. This is officially Coy Gaither's Bedford Lake, but most people I know simply call it Bedford Lake. The lake is about 45-ish acres compared to well over 3,000 for Normandy Lake. But this lake has an interesting story. Bedford the Gator. Bedford Lake is known by the locals for some great fishing, but according to some of the stories I've heard and seen, for a time there was also a no-kidding, real-life alligator who made the lake its home, starting there in either the late 1970s or early 1980s. I have no real idea how it got there, but what I've seen is that it was likely released there, that perhaps someone had it as a pet, which, by the way, is illegal in Tennessee, I'm pretty sure. But when it got too big, it was released at the lake. It evidently was something of a tourist attraction for a time until it developed a taste for the local canines. When it attacked the caretaker's black lab, he shot it and killed it. And this was reportedly in the mid-1990s. It's even said to have been mentioned on a newscast at the time by the now late Bill Hall, the beloved weatherman, on Nashville TV station Channel 4 WSMV. And while gators are evidently starting now to make their way northward into the fringes of the Tennessee River, the Tombigbee Waterway may be helping to facilitate that. In the 1970s, Bedford the Gator evidently had a little help, and he ultimately met an untimely end. And so in our drive so far, we've wandered around the perimeter of the county, Normandy, Wartrace, Bell Buckle, and even briefly in Unionville. Now let's drive toward the center of the county to focus on the county seat, Shelbyville. Like Shelby County, the home of Memphis, Shelbyville is named for Isaac Shelby. Shelby was a Revolutionary War veteran who was also an early settler in what was to become Tennessee. He fought in the Battle of Kings Mountain and later moved to Kentucky to take ownership of lands awarded to him for his military service. And he later served as the very first governor of that state. And he went on to work closely with Andrew Jackson in the land purchased from the Chickasaws for large portions of the western lands of both Tennessee and Kentucky. He was a popular military and political leader early in our nation's history, and much of that service is tied directly to the history of Tennessee as well. The town of Shelbyville was laid out in 1810 and incorporated in 1819. As sectionalism grew throughout the first half of the 19th century, Bedford County was a bit different from other southern Middle Tennessee counties with regard to its support of secession, especially after the election of Lincoln in 1860. Based on a statewide vote in February 1861 on whether or not to have a secession convention, Bedford County voted against such a convention by a 2-to-1 margin. Lincoln County, Marshall County, and Murray County voted for such a convention by a slightly higher margin than Bedford had voted against it. Franklin County voted by an even higher margin than that for the convention. Only Coffee County voted against the convention among those southern Middle Tennessee counties near Bedford County. And Coffee was only marginally opposed. It was close to an even split there. By the time the June referendum was voted on in June 1861, even Bedford and Coffee counties had aligned with the rest, although in all but Bedford, the vote was in the high 90s or higher in percentage favor of secession. Lincoln County was actually 100% in favor of secession. But why Bedford still had almost 1/3 of its vote going against secession? may have something to do with the reputation that Shelbyville had gained during this period. According to city history, Shelbyville was known in the area as Little Boston during this period due to the strong pro-Union sympathy in the town. And Bedford County, after the Battle of Stones River, saw a good bit of action in the subsequent Tullahoma Campaign. This was due to multiple factors. First, the railroad was the primary means of logistical support for both armies. And as we've already noted, there were numerous rail towns in Bedford County, meaning that the railroad crossed through the county. And secondly, the reason the rail crossed through the county was in part due to the reason the Warriors Path also had passed through. There were natural passes there through the hills and ridges, such as Liberty Gap near Bell Buckle, which was the scene of a significant engagement early in the Tullahoma Campaign from June 24 through 26, 1863, in torrential rains. The following day, June 27th, in that same torrential rainstorm that had made Liberty Gap such a miserable fight, Rosecrans sent 2 divisions to threaten Shelbyville. In a confused and heated battle, Confederate artillery was placed in the direction that the Union attack was expected, right in the middle of town on Main Street. However, when the Union cavalry charged, the Confederate artillery overshot the attackers, and only 2 Union men went down. The vanguard of the charge was led by Major Charles Davis, as the Union cavalry attacked with sabers drawn, and they succeeded in neutralizing the Confederate position and capturing one of their guns. Davis was later awarded the Medal of Honor for his role in what would become a significant Union victory in the Tullahoma Campaign, and in what is also widely considered to be the point at which the Union cavalry demonstrated that they had achieved parity with the Confederate cavalry. A historical marker noting Davis's heroics and Medal of Honor award may be found on the Shelbyville Square today. In 1916, a company was founded in Shelbyville that would serve to spearhead what would become one of the defining industries of the town. It was then that Colonel James Rayford Musgrave would found Musgrave Pencil Company in the town because of the significant amount of cedar rail fences in the area. Red cedar was then the preferred wood for making pencils because of its lightweight, straight grain, and ability to resist rot. For the first few years, Musgrave hired workers to gather fence posts and rails, which would then be cut into pencil slats and shipped to Europe, where European pencil makers would convert the slats into pencils. By 1923, he'd procured the equipment necessary to begin manufacturing the pencils in Shelbyville. After World War II, a number of other pencil manufacturers moved their operations to Shelbyville, and by the 1950s, there were half a dozen such manufacturers in the town, leading Governor Buford Ellington to declare Shelbyville as Pencil City. But by the end of the 1990s, the rise of offshore manufacturing resulted in the decline of pencil making in Shelbyville. Today, according to multiple reports, only one manufacturer still makes pencils in Shelbyville, the company that started it all, Musgrave. There are only 4 companies remaining in the entire United States. Shelbyville by itself used to have half that many more. But today, Musgrave is the only one left standing in Shelbyville, and its website reminds visitors that this year, Musgrave turns 110 years old. If you've been enjoying the Tennessee History Nerd, there's a way to take a little piece of it with you. We've got merchandise available, shirts, hats, and more, so you can represent the show wherever you go. You can check that out at summersmediaenterprises.com/merch. And as always, thanks for listening. Now, let's return to the story. Another thing for which Shelbyville is well known is something we introduced when we were talking about Wartrace, the annual walking horse celebration. This event has happened every year since the celebration began in 1939. The first such events were in Wartrace, but due to the crowds and the inability of Little Wartrace to handle all that traffic, a few years later it moved to Shelbyville, where it's been held ever since. This is a significant event. You might say it's the Kentucky Derby of the walking horse world. The event lasts for 11 days and concludes the Saturday before Labor Day with the crowning of the World Grand Champion Tennessee walking horse. The event typically draws 2,000 horses and 250,000 spectators every year, and of course, it brings significant revenue to Shelbyville and Bedford County. The event has not been altogether without controversy at times, though. Over the years, there have been recurring allegations of soaring, an abusive practice in which the affected horses step higher. Chemicals or devices are applied to a competing horse's lower legs or hooves. This causes the horse to be in pain and forces an exaggerated gait, and thus this practice is illegal under the Horse Protection Law of 1970. Every competing horse now must be inspected by representatives from the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, APHIS, to determine if the horse has been sored. In 2006, no World Grand Champion was named due to APHIS inspectors disqualifying all but 3 of the finalists, and the show management canceled the class. But the celebration rebounded and has continued every year since walking horse trainer Henry Davis got the idea from visiting Winchester's Crimson Clover Festival and suggested that Wartrace should have something similar for the walking horses. But even though the Crimson Clover Festival is no longer held in Franklin County, the walking horse celebration has continued to this day in Bedford County, first in Wartrace and now for many, many years in Shelbyville. But in more recent years, a new legacy has been established in Bedford County. To provide a little bit of context, for many years, Tennessee law prohibited the production of liquor by choosing to restrict distilling only to counties where such activity had legally occurred before federal prohibition under the 18th Amendment. This meant that the only counties that then qualified were Moore, Lincoln, and Coffee counties. And it also served to preserve the 2 distillery monopolies of Jack Daniel and George Dickel. But in 2009, this was opened to 41 counties. In 2013, it was opened further to permit distilleries to operate in any wet municipality, any town that permitted the sale of spirits. And that now takes us north up US 231 from Shelbyville to the former Sand Creek Farms, a highly renowned and famous facility for Tennessee walking horses. Sand Creek operated as a Tennessee walking horse farm for decades, but it was purchased in late 2017 to become the home of Uncle Nearest Distillery, which brings us to the whiskey that I mentioned at the beginning of the episode. Whiskey and horses and gators, oh my. You didn't think I meant Dickel when we talked about Normandy, did you? Uncle Nearest is how Nathan Nearest Green was known to many folks. He was a slave who was known locally near Lynchburg, Tennessee, for his ability to make whiskey and had perfected what was known as the Lincoln County process, a method of filtering corn liquor through sugar maple charcoal and then aged in charred oak barrels. He was producing this liquor even before the Civil War for a local minister. When the minister's wife and the members of his church objected to a man in that position producing liquor, he sold the distillery to one of his associates, a young man by the name of Jack Daniel, who had served as the minister's jack-of-all-trades chore boy. Yes, that Jack Daniel. Green worked for Daniel at the distillery as his first master distiller, and for generations, members of the Green family have worked for the Jack Daniel distillery. But the name on the bottles were of the white guy who owned the distillery business, not the black man whose knowledge and ability made it all possible. So to honor the memory of the man who had perfected the distilling and aging process that defined Tennessee whiskey, a minority-owned and run company was created that has Nearest Green's name on the bottle, and it was created here in Bedford County. On September 14th, 2019, Nearest Green Distillery opened for business, though the brand itself debuted in July of 2017. Now, the Nearest Green Distillery is still a working farm and still has a number of walking horses on the property. But what is front and center when you visit the facility is that Nearest Green is a distiller of premium whiskey. Inside that repurposed horse barn is what the distillery boasts as the longest bar in the world. The Humble Baron Bar, which is 518 feet long and wraps around an indoor stage. And the distillery is now one of the most successful minority-owned distilleries in the U.S., with some of the descendants of Nathan Green serving on the board. And the whiskey itself has gained a good deal of recognition, having received well over 1,000 awards and accolades since it debuted. Somehow, I think Uncle Nearest would approve. And the Nearest Green Distillery was our last stop on our drive around Bedford County. We've covered Thomas Bedford, Isaac Shelby, Andrew Jackson, Wartrace and the Warrior's Path, the Nashville and Chattanooga Railroad, walking horses, bell buckle, R.C. Colas and Moon Pies, Unionville, Webb School, Prentice Cooper, Jim Nance McCord, Normandy, Bedford the Alligator, Normandy and Bedford Lakes, the Duck River, Charles Davis, Little Boston, and now Nearest Green. That's quite a drive, but Bedford County has quite a history. We'll cover some of these things in more depth, with some of them getting their own episode at some point in the future. Today, that was a pretty neat drive around the second county in our drive across Tennessee. Our next county drive will be just across the Tennessee River off of exit 133 on I-40 when we go to Benton County. But first, we're going to drive all the way west on I-40 and drop below the bluffs at Memphis to check out the uneven history of Mud Island. I hope you'll join us for that next week. Until then, I'm Big John Summers, the Tennessee history nerd, and I am history. Okay, as we like to do for each episode, we want to acknowledge our sources before we completely wrap things up. Sources used in the preparation of this episode include on-site research conducted in Bedford County, Tennessee, Tennessee historical markers, the historical marker database, the official Bedford County government website, the official City of Shelbyville website, votearchive.com for 1861 secession convention and referendum election returns, the Tennessee Encyclopedia, and Tennessee History for Kids. I also referenced the official websites of Uncle Nearest Distillery, Jack Daniels, Musgrave Pencil Company, the Webb School, the Bell Buckle Chamber of Commerce, and the Tennessee Walking Horse National Celebration. Additional information was drawn from a WPLN article regarding Musgrave Pencil Company and from the Rutherford County Historical Society blog, particularly the article Jefferson Gone But Not Forgotten, and a November 2004 post on everything2.com about Bedford, the Bedford Lake alligator. As I've noted before, what I do would not be possible if it weren't for all the research and documentation done by so many others before me. I'm truly thankful for these resources, and I want to acknowledge them and to encourage you to check them out if you're interested in doing a deeper dive into the topics that I covered in this episode. And as always, thanks so much for listening. The Tennessee History Nerd is part of Summers Media Enterprises. In addition to the podcast, we produce short-form historical video content that you can find on our social media accounts on Facebook, Instagram, and X. And I'm also available on a limited basis for speaking engagements, presentations, and educational events. So if you're interested in having us to speak or collaborate with you, you can find more information through the links in the show notes. Thanks again for listening.